And I think okay, yes, we're recording. Okay, awesome. Well, hello everyone. Many familiar faces are back for this presentation. I'm so happy to see y'all. I'm happy that you're back. Today's presentation, like I said, is going to be budgeting. And if you're new to the Common Sense program, a hearty welcome to you. The Common Sense Money Management Office is a peer-to-peer service available to students at UT Dallas to help increase your financial literacy. um, my name is Sandra, and I'm one of the peer advisors here from the Common Sense program. And a fun fact about me is that I'm actually a neuroscience major, but I'm extremely passionate about personal finance because finance needs to be accessible to everyone, because it impacts all of us. You know, whether you're a JSTOM major or you're in BBS or you're in NSM or ECS or whichever school you're in, all of us have to use money. And I think that it's a testament to show that it's really important for all of us to understand personal finance and understanding how to start being more financially literate, especially in college, as we're kind of, training, um, as we're pre-professionals and hoping to have full-time jobs in the future. Um, yeah, today's presentation, as the first title slide said, is about budgeting. And this is the second installment in our week-long Money Week series. So maybe you attended yesterday and you know that yesterday was The Price is Right, the first part of our Money Week series. Today is budgeting. Tomorrow will be how to stretch $20. And throughout this series, it's kind of like an introduction to what Common Sense can be and to what Common Sense does. And if you stay throughout the entire presentation, you'll be entered to win a scholarship drawing at the end of the week after all of our money week is over. So that's exciting, winning money. Yay! So kind of to intro into our segue of budgeting, before I even begin, just as an icebreaker question, you could feel free to type your answer in the chat. How many of you guys either have used a budget in the past or are currently utilizing a budget right now? Or you could also do show of hands with the little raise your hand feature in Microsoft Teams. Okay, quite a few. Yeah. Um, that's awesome. Actually, that's really awesome. I honestly don't think before I came to college I really had a budget. Or I had like a very loose idea, as in I knew how much I made for my part-time job in high school, but I didn't have a real budget set in place. So y'all are ahead of the curve. So hopefully in this presentation, you'll learn some new tips and tricks on how to go about budgeting. Um, but also in addition, I'll also break down common rules of thumb that a lot of the times are discussed when talking about budgeting and how to make a budget work for you. So, just as a definition, a budget is an itemized summary of likely income and expenses in a given period. And I know that's a mouthful of a sentence, but in essence, a budget is really just at its very core how much income, so how much will you think you'll be making, and then how much will you have to spend. And if you make that difference, then hopefully there's money left over and you can decide what to do with that money left over, whether it's putting it in savings, whether it's you know, if you're wanting to spend a little bit more on something than normal, hopefully there's surplus when you subtract your income and expenses. So the very first step to creating a budget is to gather your money details. And what I mean by that is gather where your income will come from. Like I said, because a budget really does have two components, what your income is and what your expenses are. As a college student, your income can look kind of different. Maybe your parents are helping you with school. Maybe your parents are helping cover college tuition expenses. Um, oh, if you have any sort of question, you can go ahead and type it in the chat or you can speak it verbally. Okay, cool. Yeah, so if at any time in the presentation you have a question, you can definitely utilize the raise your hand feature and just speak it verbally, or you can type it in the chat and I'll address it as fast as you can type it. So like I said, um, income can look kind of different for college students just because many college students aren't able to hold full-time jobs or even very extensive part-time jobs. So maybe your income comes from your parents. Maybe they give you an allowance of sorts for the semester. Maybe they're helping you cover your tuition and your room and board expenses. So that's not something that you necessarily are paying for yourself. Maybe they're covering your tuition and that's not something you're paying for yourself. Whichever aspect of college that they're helping you with, it's important to have that conversation with them, um, just so that you personally have an idea of exactly how much they will be able to cover and are willing to cover, and you can factor that into your budget. The second is to review scholarships and grants. So maybe you filled out, maybe you were eligible for scholarship money, and that is considered part of your income as a college student. Because when I mean income, I mean any sort of money that you will be able to use to buy and afford the way that you're living your life in college. So scholarships and grants are a good way to do that. Um, Even in terms of loans, if you're using loans to pay for your school, budgeting your loans is something that is also very important. I know sometimes it sounds funny to say that most people don't think about budgeting their loans necessarily, but if you have $6,000 or $7,000 worth of loans per semester, it's also really important to include that when you're including your details, because as a college student, if that's how you're affording to live, that is your income. Even though you're not necessarily working or it's not traditional income, it's what you're using to cover your expenses. And if you are working a job, have an estimate of how much you will be able to make from your employment. So this can be tough depending on your job. If it's a steady, you know exactly how many hours per week you'll be working and exactly how much you'll make per hour. It's a little bit easier. But if you're working like a tip-based job and you're not quite sure, one of the things that I advise is if you've been working in this job for about a month or so, look back at the month history and especially if it's a new job, ask around and see like if you came in at a heavier period when maybe you're making a little bit more money than usual, factor that into how much you'll actually be making. But if it's a little bit harder to try and estimate how much you'll be making from your employment, I would say at try and budget for at the very minimum how much you think you'll be expected to make. And if you make a little bit more than that, you can always adjust your budget accordingly. And then the second thing, like I said, a budget has two components really, your income and your expenses of its very basis is the expenses in college to consider. And in college, there's quite a few. There's tuition and fees, school supplies, where you will be living, food, gas and transportation. If you're commuting and you use a toll tag, that includes your toll tag, clothing, and what we call fun money. And fun money can be, going out to eat. It could be maybe some people include subscription services in fun money. It can kind of just be anything that's leisurely, something you enjoy, something that's not necessarily an absolute necessity to your life, but something that adds joy to you and something that you want to add. So right now in the chat, or if you want to speak it verbally, um, just thinking about these two things, income and expenses, where do you think, which part of budget making, for since we have quite a few people who have made budgets or have used budgets in the past, which part of budget making, whether it's writing down and keeping track of your income or whether it's keeping track of your expenses, have you personally found to be difficult or daunting? Oh yeah, go ahead.
Hi. I think the hardest parts. Wait, sorry.
Oh yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. I think the hardest part for me would be the expenses, like making expenses towards food and school supplies, since sometimes things aren't put directly in the syllabus, so they just suddenly put it there that, oh, you have an assignment due this week and you need to buy so and so, and
Yes.
then not having like a stable form of income.
That is difficult. You're very right. Yeah, there's a lot of curveball costs that come with college sometimes. Like you said, like buying, sometimes classes require the class codes and it can be coming out of nowhere. And like you said, college, it's really hard to have a stable income. Yeah. I saw some activity. Okay, yes. Hardest part is resisting buying something you do not need but want. Yeah. Like trying to factor in your wants and factor in impulsive buys into your budget is something that can be difficult, but we'll talk about that actually. There's a way to kind of navigate that into, because one of the things that we will talk about later in this presentation is starting a budget really starts with understanding your own habits and patterns and working with your habits and patterns and not against them. So I'll kind of touch on this right now since we're talking about it, but if you're someone who likes to, spontaneously go out and get ice cream a lot, or maybe you're someone who likes art and you like, walking through the farmer's market or walking through, little flea shops and like buying things kind of impulsively, those things are actually things you can plan for, even though they sound like impulses because you're not necessarily quite sure what you'll buy or um, when you plan on buying something, you can kind of plan for your wants and leave room in your budget to actually, go out and buy the things that you want, but in a way that will help you still manage your finances and not hurt you. Um, oh, there's a Taco Bell on campus? Wow. That's gonna make it harder for sure for me too. I love Taco Bell. I didn't even know that. That's something new for me. Yeah, even Taco Bell. I am a sucker for the Baja Blast at Taco Bell. So I definitely agree. Buying something that you want but don't necessarily need, because I've never actually probably needed a Baja Blast, but I definitely wanted it. It's opening this month. Wow. See, I learned something new today too. That's great. Um, yeah, thank you for sharing, everyone. Those are some really cool, well, not cool, but like some really important things to consider when thinking about a budget. And actually, before I get to the slide, since we were already talking about it, one of the things that I kind of just touched on, and that all of these things, oh yes, prioritizing expenses each week for me can be difficult because I have to remember that school and basic necessities come first, and then I need to remember to not buy anything just because I want to. Yeah, the all of those things fit perfectly into what if we were in person, this presentation would have been a little bit different, but all of these things factor into understanding how you spend and what your personality is as a spender. There's actually a few games that you can play. And actually, if you guys attend Smart About Money next week, which is our 5 week long um, personal finance kind of workshop or boot camp to kind of get you guys engaged in exactly all of the different aspects of personal finance that you can consider in your life, and you get a certificate at the end. There's actually a really cool budgeting game that is in the PowerPoint. And I didn't want to include it here because I didn't want it to be redundant. And I wanted you guys to experience it if you do decide to do Smart About Money um, in the Smart About Money workshop series. But it actually kind of gets you thinking about it's a virtual game, it's an online game that you can play, and it simulates you being an adult, or we're already all adults, but simulates you being like a full-time employed um, person in the workforce, and allows you to kind of really test and see what are your actual spending habits and patterns. And the way that one of the games that we have in our office kind of describes it is kind of like a money personality test, kind of seeing what type of spender are you. And like I said earlier, if maybe, for example, you're a little bit more conservative on the spending side, and what I mean by that is maybe you like to just save a lot. You like to work, you like to, buy your necessities and then just save all of that money. You won't necessarily have to worry about um, buying wants when you don't necessarily are needing them in that moment of time. Versus some people, myself included, um, are the opposite. You know, you make your money, you cover your needs and expenses and your necessities that come first. And then there's a lot of things that you may want to buy that you didn't necessarily factor into your budget. So, one of the things that I want you to be thinking about as we're going through this presentation is it's really great that all of you guys right now are even kind of aware of your own money personalities or financial personalities. But as we're going throughout this presentation, I show some example budgets and we kind of walk through some example budgets. Start thinking about what your own habits and patterns are. And at the end, I'll ask you, how do you think you could make a budget work for your personality? So if you're someone who saves a lot, but you're wanting to try and maybe save even more, or maybe you're wanting to try and live like be a little bit more spontaneous and a little bit more buying wants, maybe that's something you could factor in. If you're someone like me who likes to buy a lot of wants and stuff, by the end of the presentation, maybe you'll be able to think of some tangible ways to try and incorporate wants every single month into your budget so that way you're not feeling guilty about the fact that you spent money on something that you wanted but didn't necessarily need. So, the budgeting tools that I wanted to talk about before we look into the example budgets, um, I wanted to talk about this first because it's actually pretty important. So, for those of you guys who have already used a budget, show of hands, like a little raise your hand symbol, if you used an app to make your budget. Okay, yeah, an app to make your budget. Yeah, okay, most people, yeah. And then show of hands if you did it the old fashioned way, pen to paper, write it out in a journal. Okay, yeah. Um, so as you can even see in this group, there's a variety of ways that you can make a budget, that you can decide to create a budget, but no matter which option that you choose, and even in digital tools, I like to include Excel spreadsheets just because it's a digital option as opposed to pen to paper, but it depends on who you are. Maybe you consider Excel old fashioned, but either way, the entire point of either a digital tool or pen to paper is that you should be willing to look back at it periodically and actually check every month if it's working for you. So right here on the PowerPoint, I put a little example of what a college student's um, expenses could be and what this kind of budget could look like. So they have their expenses for this is just for one semester laid out, their tuition and fees for the semester, definitely cheap, school supplies, their rent, their utilities, internet, food, clothes, and fund money. I'll talk about fund money actually a little bit later because that's where you can kind of incorporate buying wants every so often without feeling guilty about it. But even in this budget right here, this budget was done in an Excel spreadsheet. Maybe, for example, like if you're the student who likes to do pen to paper, but you decided to use an Excel spreadsheet for once, but you hardly ever look at your Excel spreadsheet, using an Excel spreadsheet, if you're a person who likes to use pen to paper, may not actually help you, not because you created the budget wrong, but because you won't actually go back and look at it. Because maybe, for example, if this student doesn't actually ever, if they make this budget at the beginning of the semester and never looks at it ever again, it may not actually be helpful because maybe they realize, oh, I spend more on groceries than I actually thought I was going to spend. Or maybe you realize, oh, I need more clothes than I thought I needed because, maybe they got an internship or something. But because they don't actually like using Excel and they never actually go back and look at their budget, they're not able to accommodate for these expenses accordingly. And it may cut into some of their other funds and it may make their semester a little bit financially tight. And vice versa. If you decide, oh, I need to create a budget, so you get out a piece of paper and you write everything down, but you lose pieces of paper so easily, or if you're like me and I buy a planner almost every single year, and without fail, halfway through the year, I stop looking at the planner and I stop using it because I've learned that I'm much more of a digital calendar person and I use my bullet journal just for thoughts and ideas, then it may be more beneficial for me to use a digital tool as opposed to a paper to pen budgeting tool, because I know personally for me, I am so much more likely to just either lose it or forget about it, or it's going to feel like a chore to have to go back and go out of my way to get this journal. Um, because I won't ever use it. Oh yeah, we have a good tip in here. And you can also take a picture of your budget if you decide to do the old-fashioned way, so you never lose it and it's always on your phone. That's a perfect tip. That's actually a really, really good tip. Yeah, I never done that, but you know what? Maybe if I had, I wouldn't have lost it. And I wouldn't have not looked at it. Yeah, that's a really good point. Being creative with the way that you decide to do your budget and being creative with the way that you decide to keep track of it is the number one most important tip that I can really try and share with you guys, because like I said, it's really only going to work for you. So whichever ways that you think you most likely like frequently checking things, that's going to be the best budgeting tool for you. So whenever people ask, is paper better or apps are better, whichever you're more likely to check is going to be the best option for you. And some of the free apps, the most common one I think is Mint, but of course you could always just go into your app store and check budgeting tools and see which user interface you like the best. And same thing with journals. You could probably just Google a few journals and see which one you like the best. Okay, so we kind of looked at a little bit of an example budget earlier. And here's another blank example college student budget. Um, and I like this one because it included the actual column, the expected column, and the difference column. And then this one, the other category at the very, very bottom is what I would call fun money in this previous one, and that's the one that I'll spend a little bit of time talking about here on this page. But even just looking at this budget right here, um, the actual column and the inspected column is something that I highly encourage everyone to think about at the beginning of the month and when you go back and check your budget, maybe halfway through the month. I guess, do you have a question? Oh, okay. No worries, Valeria. Um, Yeah, so in the actual column, the expected column, for example, the semester just started about 3 weeks ago. And maybe you were expecting a certain amount of financial aid. Maybe that was loans, grants, whatever it is. So at the beginning of the semester, you sat down and decided to make your budget for at least a month. And you said, this is the expected amount of financial aid that I'm going to get. This is how much I'm expecting from my job, like I said in the beginning, and this is extra money that I'm expecting. Maybe it's from your parents, maybe it's from, something else. And then in the actual column, you can actually put how much you actually received. This can be a good way to track how much you actually are going to be making from your job, especially if you have tip-based jobs or jobs that are a little bit infrequent about how much you're actually getting paid every single month. But the reason that I wanted to highlight this specific budget is because this specific budget requires you to actually go back and check the budget, to actually put in how much you actually got in terms of income and how much you were expected to spend. And the reason why I also like this is because in the expenses column, it does the same thing. So you have your expected expenses that you can always put in the beginning of the month, because when you create a budget, you kind of predict what you're going to spend at the beginning of the month. But then you also have the actual column. So as you're actually going throughout the month, maybe you realize, man, this budget is not working for me and I am not sticking to it at all. That's okay. Oh, sorry, that's okay if you're not actually sticking to it. I really like the way this budget is laid out because it requires you to go back and write down how much you actually spent that much, how much you actually spent that month um, on things like tuition, fees, housing, dining. phone, etc. Because it allows you to be honest with yourself. So maybe for the month of September, you put your expected expenses and expected income all in these columns. And then halfway through the month, as you're spending, you start to actually put in the actual expenses that you had. And you realize, oh, I'm spending more than I thought I was going to spend. Um, when you realize that, you can ask yourself two questions. You can either ask yourself, am I spending more because I undervalued or I underestimated how much I actually spend? Or am I spending more because I need to cut down on certain things that I don't need to be spending on? Asking yourself either one of those questions can help you adjust your budget accordingly for the next month. So that way your budget will actually work for you. But either way, I wanted to highlight this budget just because it has the expected column and the actual column. And having an expected column and an actual column requires you to actually go back and think about, is this budget actually working for me? And am I actually spending the way that I want to spend? And one of the things that I wanted to highlight at the very bottom in the other category, if you have wants that you start spending on and you find it really hard for you right now to try and um, accommodate and factor in those wants into your monthly budget or your semester budget, I actually highly encourage you guys to try. And one of the things that I think is a really cool way whenever you're spending or whenever you're creating a budget is look at your bank account history. So if you have an app on your phone for your bank account, it's a really easy way to do it, or even on the desktop version on your laptop or on your computer, and look back at the last 3 months of bank history. That's a lot. So maybe if you don't want to do 3 months, you could do 2 months or even just 1 month. But if you look back at your bank history, you can actually kind of predict your spending patterns. Especially for those of you who this is your very first time creating a budget and you're not quite sure what your expected expenses are. If you look back at your bank history, you can actually kind of predict what your expected expenses will be in the future, um, by creating kind of like a mock budget based off of old histories. So, for example, we just started the month of September, and maybe today after this presentation, you decide, I want to create a budget, but I've never created a budget before, and I actually don't know what my expenses are. Or maybe you have created a budget before and you're like, but this budget never works for me, or I find it really hard to try and restrict myself from from purchasing things that I want. So, what I'd advise everyone to do, no matter which boat you're in, is go back to the month of August or even the month of July. But I'll use August for this example. Go back to the month of August on your bank account and plug in the expenses that you had. Things like tuition and fees are obviously a little bit different because that's on a semester basis. So you already know what those are. But doing this kind of strategy is really helpful for things like dining, for phone, for fuel, for the other category, which the other category on this budget was called your fund money. But look back on the month history and see, how much did I actually spend on food? You know, how much did I actually spend on my phone bill? How much did I actually spend on fuel for transportation? How much did I actually spend in the other category? And the other category could be, it could just be as simple as fun money, like this other budget had. The other category you could make more specific. If you have frequent purchases, you could do clothes. You could do like self-care things like beauty, hair, nails, things like that. Subscription services could be a specific category in the other category if you pay for a few subscription services. But I highly encourage everyone to do that for the month of August and plug all of those values into the actual column. And then once you do that for the month of August, you can kind of, after you do that, you can sit down with yourself and say, are these numbers that I'm okay with? Am I okay with how much I'm spending on food, of how much I'm spending on fuel, with how much I'm spending in the other category, et cetera, et cetera. And if you are okay with it, well, then great. So for the next month, the month of September that we just started, you can create your budget based off of what you did in August, by saying, okay, in August, I spent this much on food, this much on fuel, this much on my phone bill, and I want to spend the same amount in September because that was very comfortable for me and I was able to live pretty comfortably with that budget. So now you can use the numbers from August to create your numbers from September, and it helps you know this is how much I spend, and this is how much I can account for my expenses, and that can start helping you realize how much you can save if you're working, and when you subtract how much you're paying for from your income. If on the other hand though, you look back at the month of August and you're like, man, I spent a lot of money on clothes. I saw a lot of cute clothes, you know, a lot of end of summer sales are happening right now, and you spent a lot of money on clothes and you're like, you know, I didn't need to spend all that money on clothes, and maybe you didn't even like all the clothes that you bought. For the month of September, what you can do in your budget, if you decide, you know, I still like clothes and I still want to be able to leave room in my budget to buy a few clothing pieces, you can set a cap for yourself for how much you'll be able to spend on clothing items or on fun money for the month of September. That doesn't mean that you're restricting yourself on the number of pieces, but it can restrict yourself on how much you're spending on fun money. So for example, for me, I like clothes. So for me, if I spent, you know, $100 on clothes in August, but I'm like, you know, I want to try and save. I have a goal to save X amount of money by the end of the semester. So I want to cut down on my clothing, but I still like clothes and some clothing pieces I would still like to give myself the option to buy if it's really nice. I'll say for the month of September, I will instead only allow myself to spend $75 on clothes. So I only have $75 that I can spend on clothes. And if I go above that, I had to tell myself no because it's in my budget and I'm checking it periodically and I can see that I can't go above $75. Um, One of the things that I know I mentioned this earlier for those of you who joined us yesterday, but we have a podcast. The Common Sense Podcast has a podcast called Change Matters. And one of the tips that I actually utilized last year in terms of budgeting to try and limit the wants category, because I found it really easy to also just lie to myself and, you know, go ahead and swipe my card even though I knew that it was beyond what I told myself I could spend in the wants category, my budget, is I went to the bank and I physically withdrew the amount of money in cash. So I told myself, you know, Sandra, you can only spend, I had a savings goal that I wanted to meet by the end of last fall semester. So I told myself you could only spend $60 eating out every single month. So I physically went to the bank and I withdrew $60, and that was the in cash, and that was the only money that I could use to eat out. And it was actually a very effective method because I could physically see when the cash was dwindling. Yeah, the cash envelope system. Yeah, when the cash is dwindling, you have no other choice but to not spend because it's gone. And you're going to, you know, you're going to feel, at least for me, I was not going to actually physically go out to the bank and draw more money for cash just to eat out when I knew that I had a goal that I wanted to meet. Um, so yeah, that could be another way if you're trying to cut down the wants category or to keep yourself accountable to your wants category. But I wanted to talk about that because I think there's a misconception that when you're budgeting, you cut out the wants category or you cut out the things that you want and you cut out your spending patterns and habits. But having a budget is not about cutting out the things that you actually want to spend on. It's about restricting yourself so that way or not restricting, but it's about disciplining yourself so that way you can meet the financial goals that you want to meet in the future, especially if you have savings goals or if you want to be able to allocate your money to different things in a different season. So we kind of already talked about this, so I will go on to the next slide. But yeah, identify your income, list all of your expenses, plan for any long-term or future expenditures. Um, in planning for long-term and future expenditures, I include kind of like I said, financial goals. If maybe at the end of this semester, you want to be able to buy holiday gifts for your friends and family, then maybe that could be a long-term or future expenditure that you're saving towards. every single month. So you include that in your budget. So you create your budget so that way you save money every single month to accommodate that. And that goes along with setting financial goals. And that goes along with telling every dollar where to go. That can sound kind of intimidating, but I think telling every dollar where to go is really just more about making sure that you're tracking your own habits and you're keeping yourself accountable and responsible. And yeah, the next thing that we were going to talk about is savings and emergencies, but we'll talk about that next. So, yeah, to go into the specifics of how you can actually break down your budget, housing usually will be more expensive, transportation, personal expenses, debt and student loans. This can also include credit card bills if you have a credit card right now, and investment in savings. So I feel like we kind of have a good handle on some of these other things. The percentages will vary based off of what your actual expenses are. And especially for students, it varies a lot just because student situations vary or change very frequently from semester to semester or even from year to year. So I would not feel pressured to really try and budget in terms of these percentages while you're a student, because in general, your housing will probably be more expensive than your transportation, which will probably be more a little more expensive, excuse me, than your personal expenses. But the one that I wanted to really touch on is investments and savings. As students, we are not a group that's traditionally known for saving our money, or creating savings accounts or rainy day funds or things like that. Partly because, we have restricted income, but I do want to encourage everyone to create a savings portion in your budget. So that way you do have money for either like a rainy day if something happens, maybe you commute and your tire goes flat, maybe you have an emergency um, that you need to cover. I know we mentioned in the beginning, maybe professors have surprise costs in the class. Maybe you need to buy like I mean, we don't use clickers anymore right now, but like people used to use like Turning Point subscriptions and things like that, that were unexpected costs that kind of popped up. A savings account can kind of help you do that. And when you're creating a budget, budgeting for the savings account first could actually help you be accountable and maintain that savings account or savings rainy day fund. So it could look like 10%, it could look like 5%, it could even look as simple as every single time I get paid, I put away $20. It doesn't even have to be a percentage. Um, it could be just a small amount to tell yourself that this is slowly going to grow. And in case I need it, it'll be an option available to me and I can use in the future. And another popular rule of budgeting that a lot of people use is the 50, 30, 20. Oh, yes, high yield savings accounts are a really, really great option. And what that means as a high yield savings account is high yield savings accounts have, but the term high yield means high interest, so it'll come back higher, because the traditional savings account attached to your checking account when you open it has a really, really low interest rate. I think at most, a lot of people will end up making like 44 cents or a dollar from their savings account by the end of the year. But a high yield savings account, although you have to consistently put a lot more money than a traditional savings account into it, um, will give you higher returns on your investment because A, you're not using the money, and B, it has a higher interest. That means it'll grow at a faster rate in that savings account. So thank you for bringing that option up. Um, a popular budgeting rule is the 50, 30, 20 rule. That should say 20, excuse me. Um, and it's kind of a way to loosely create a budget if creating categories feels restrictive to you. This goes again to your personality and how you like to organize things. For some people, they really like to put every single thing in an Excel category or in a list so that way they can see where every single thing is going. For others, it's a lot easier to say, this portion of my income is just going to go towards necessities, this portion is going to go towards entertainment, and this portion is going to go to savings. And then you can allocate it within that portion. So, what that means is if, for example, I have $100, it may be easier if you're the type of person who the 50-30-20 rule sounds a lot easier for you to manage. If you have $100, it may be easier for you to say, okay, within the $50 that I'm using for housing and transportation, let's imagine that $50 could cover that. Within the $50, no matter what I do, I have to make housing, transportation, etc. fit within $50. So that may be a little bit easier for you to wrap your mind around as opposed to trying to list out every single item. Um, but that depends on who you are. But it is a really popular rule of thumb just to also make sure that you're not spending on a lot more on one category than another, especially if you have savings goals or if you're trying to cut down on entertainment things. Like I mentioned in the very beginning, Mint is a really great resource. Um, Obviously, some of you guys have used paper or like physical budgeting journals or budgeting tools, and those are really great resources. Um, but in general, budgeting will help you create and manage spending goals. It can help you monitor your credit score, especially if you have a credit card and you're including your credit card expenditures in your budget. Um, and Mint can help you do this. Mint will give you weekly summary reports. It'll give you alerts for late payments and stuff. It will help you monitor your credit score, and it has investment features. So it has all of the things all combined into it. If you like apps and if you like digital things, but if that's not your cup of tea, there's also really great physical resources out there for you to use. And this is kind of an example of what Mint looks like um, in the app. This is, it looks like a lot and it's a lot of colors, but this is kind of like an example that was just pulled from the internet and can kind of let you know like how the breakdown would look like in terms of the cash flow. And it gives you little alerts here, as you can see in this first column, about high spending, about what your spending patterns and habits are. It can let you know if you have a surplus or not, if you're going over budget, under budget. It'll give you emails and stuff. And if you're on your phone a lot anyway, it can be a really great way to kind of monitor that. And it's also a really great way if maybe the cash envelope system isn't something that you feel like you can actually utilize. Um, you can just set a cap in the Mint app. You can say, listen, I'm only going to spend $50 on fast food per month. As you're spending, it'll show you, as you can see in this very last picture over here, this person only has $3 left in their fast food spending for their budget. So Mint will let you know that, hey, you're reaching that, point. You can't go past that point. You can't go any further. So it can be a really great way for you to check your budget and monitor your budget. And also, it can be a really great option for the budget to be updated without you having to actually update it every single month, because you don't have to input your spending. Mint will be connected to your bank account, so you don't have to physically input like, oh, I spent $11.50 at, Chipotle. It'll do that automatically. So that way, when you check the Mint app, it'll give you a real time thing of how you're doing in your budget. Yeah, I talked about your bank account earlier. It's a good resource. It's online, it's on the go, it's convenient, and it's obviously very accurate because it is your bank account, and it's very secure because it's your bank account. And yeah, like I said, having a budget can really help break down various aspects of your life. And most importantly, I think the most important part of having a budget is that it helps reveal your financial habits and your financial personality, so to speak. And it gets you thinking about your spending habits and your spending trends, and if you're okay with your current spending habits and spending trends. So, in conclusion, for our budgeting presentation, if there's anything that I want you guys to walk away from, if you didn't walk away with any tips or anything, is that ultimately there's no best attitude about how to create a budget or how to save or spend your money. Um, there's no, if you have a lot of wants, that's not a bad thing. If you want to save a lot, again, that's not a bad thing. It's all based off of what are your goals and what will help improve your quality of life, and what will aid your quality of life. Because money is a tool that's here to work for you and help you live the life that you want. So that's why it's important for you to know what you want and to know what your preferences are, so that way a budget can help you to do that. Um, so never feel pressured or feel like a budget is a heavy, weighty thing that's restricting you. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, a budget is just there to guide you and let you know if you're working towards your goals or not. So, yeah, before I talk about any upcoming events, I want to leave the next 3 to 5 minutes or so for questions, or if anyone else has any additional tips they'd like to share with the group about budgeting, or about maybe how you've budgeted in the past, and if there's any thing that I can answer questions about. Oh, you can feel free to use the chat option or the raise your hand option. All right. Well, if we don't have any other questions, oh, okay, we have a few questions. Oh, wait. Well, while you guys type your questions, um, I'll talk about the upcoming events that we have. Um, Smart About Money, like I mentioned, kind of midway through our presentation, is a 5-week workshop series that has two options. It has an afternoon, or it has a lunchtime option, which is during this time today, and it has an evening option from 5 to 6 p.m. And Smart About Money is a 5-week personal finance workshop that goes a lot deeper into depth into the topics, things like budgeting, things like investment, things like credit, um, that can kind of just get you thinking about overall, what does personal finance look like for you as a college student? And at the end of the workshop series, you get a personal finance certification upon completion. That could be a really great way to let future employers or future, if you're looking for internships, let them know that you already have a good foundation in personal finance and in finances in general. It could help you in the future. And it's a very it's only once a week for 1 hour, 5 weeks. It's a really great way to start learning about personal finance. And our aim for Smart About Money is to help give you guys a comprehensive view and a comprehensive look as to what personal finance looks like for you. And as I know everyone here knows, this is Money Week, and you are here Wednesday, 12 to 1 p.m. In the middle of the week, our second Money Week workshop series. This was the budgeting workshop. And tomorrow from 11 to 12 will be our How to Stretch $20 in a Week, led by Aditya, who's our other wonderful peer advisor in the Common Sense office, and he'll be going over how to mainly about like discounts and things in the area to stretch $20 in a week, or to just stretch money in a week in general. And it's a really fun way. Oh, what's the other? Oh, the budgeting workshop is the event today. Yeah. So the budgeting workshop is today's event, and how to stretch $20 in a week is tomorrow from 11 to 12. Yeah. Good question. Um, yeah, so that's what we have going on for this week. I highly encourage y'all, if these workshops have been helpful for you, or you feel like I want to dive deeper into my own personal finance, the Smart About Money workshop would be such a great opportunity for y'all because you'll be able to walk through. We make it super interactive. There's portions of Smart About Money that I didn't want to include today because I didn't want to spoil it or give it away. But the games are really fun. It's really cool, interactive. A lot of internet resources and a lot of really interactive games to really get you thinking about what are your own personal spending habits and spending tips. Especially because in personal finance, it's all about what are your own personal habits and what are your own personal goals, and we really kind of dive deeper into that in Smart About Money. So it's a great resource and I highly recommend. And if there's no other questions, or even if you do have questions, but maybe it's a little bit more personal, or maybe you wanted to write it all out, you can always, always, always contact us to set up an appointment or just email us. Our office hours are here on the screen, and you can always schedule a one on one appointment with me or another peer advisor, and we'll be more than happy to sit down and walk you through your own personal situation. Maybe even after this workshop, you were deciding that I want to create a budget for myself, but I'm not sure where to start. You could set up a one-on-one appointment with us, and we'll be more than happy to actually sit down with you and create a budget, um, and walk you through your own personal numbers and stuff and create a budget with you and talk about what are your goals, and even be that accountability for you. If you want someone every single month to check in and be like, hey, this is my budget. It didn't work this month and I want to try something different next month, we'd be more than happy to sit down with y'all and work work through that with you and help create a budget that helps form your personal finance goals. Yeah, so you can always email us. Also, if you have any other questions or inquiries, but also if you just want to have an appointment to talk to someone face to face, you can always do that. I hope everyone here is following us on Instagram at Common Sense. You probably heard about this event through Instagram or maybe somewhere else. And if you heard about it somewhere else, thank you for joining. We share a lot of tidbits about our events and stuff, and also just other personal finance pro tips through our stories or through our actual posts. And like I mentioned in this presentation, we have a podcast, and I highly encourage everyone to listen to it, called Change Matters. It's a really short podcast because maybe if you can't make it to an hour-long workshop or you have class or something like that, our podcast covers many of the same topics, but we make it a lot more personal, and it covers um, like those different topics in a lot more personable, conversational manner. And it's 15 minutes long, so you could watch the podcast while you're doing the dish. Watch, sorry, you could listen. You could listen to the podcast while you're doing the dishes. You could listen to it while you're, doing other errands and stuff around the house. I know some people like to listen to podcasts instead of the radio while they're driving. So it's a really quick listen for most of our episodes, around 12 to 15 minutes. And it's a really quick way to hear a lot of real time tips that I have used, that other college students have used, that have been successful for us, and could be successful for you in the future. So, yes, if we have any other last minute questions, I would love to take them. I'll stay until 1 o'clock and take them. But if not, I thank everyone here so much for attending the meeting. And I hope that everyone has a great day and that you've learned something about budgeting, and that you feel welcome to reach out to us and reach out to our office if you feel like you want to learn more about us or talk to us more and let us help you reach your goals. Um, yeah, if that's all, then if you have no other questions, you're free to go. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Yes, thank you so much for attending. And thank you everyone for being interactive and for sharing and for giving everyone such helpful tips and helping one another.